Okay, I did a debate earlier today with Danny Knapp. You can probably see his channel concerning Nicaragua, mostly Nicaragua, also Black Lives Matter. I had a very contentious, testy conversation with Mr. Knapp over what was it? Well, most of it was on email, some of it was on Twitter. I kind of dragged my friend Mr. Halsey into it. It's safe to say that those two are not going to be friends anytime soon. But I think that the debate went fair. I don't even know if you can call it the debate, but I think it went very well. And I hope that Mr. Knapp found it, at least to some degree, enlightening, illustrative of what I believe. And I continue to believe that the problems in Nicaragua will continue to affect this country. Problems in Venezuela will continue to affect this country. But, I'm against intervention, and you can probably see that from this video. Other than that, please enjoy. Leave your comments below. And please like my channel. Please like the video. Subscribe to my channel. You can also check out Danny's channel. I mean, why not? I'll put a link to his channel in the description. Bye-bye.
All right, I got to figure out how to invite the Razor over here. Okay, invite people.
Hello.
Hey, okay, I think we got it now.
Okay.
All right, so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to get things started a little bit? Like, just explain your, like I would say I'm an independent progressive, whatever your definition is, and go from there.
Okay, but we are live, right?
It looks like it. Let me just click over and check.
Yeah, I think we're live.
Yeah.
So I am a YouTuber since 2016. I do a lot of stuff that relates to economics, also a lot of stuff relating to Latin America, as well as a number of, originally I was doing a lot of stuff related to the Affordable Care Act. Of course, there was a 2016 election. My channel is called Bold Like a Leopard. I also write for the Hard News Network. I write about a lot of the lies that MSNBC is doing, including a story where Rachel Maddow has smeared a number of Bernie Sanders supporters as basically Russian trolls. So you can probably find that if you look up the Mattis file. That's about it.
So you do some blogging and you have a YouTube channel and you just kind of do things from a right-wing perspective. I mean, do you consider yourself a Trump supporter, or?
I would say that I'm more of a Rand Paul supporter. There are a lot of policies that the Trump administration has that I support, but especially in terms of environmental conservation, I'd say that there's issues that I have with them. Does that answer the question?
So if somebody called you a libertarian, you wouldn't object to that?
I think after Gary Johnson, I kind of want to just say I'm an independent, but yeah, go ahead. You can call me a libertarian.
Okay. Well, since you wanted to do a debate, I guess, or talk about Nicaragua, why don't you just kind of take your time and outline, give us any important details that you think are relevant to Nicaragua, and kind of state whatever your position is on it, and just take your time and lay it out however you want to.
Okay, so one of the things that I am at pains to explain, even when I talk to people from Venezuela and Nicaragua, is that I'm against intervention in Latin America. I think that it's part of the reason that we have an issue with so many countries that have become antagonistic to us. And I think it's understandable that some of these countries ended up becoming, especially under Chavez or under Castro. I'm definitely not trying to say that the United States should be militarily intervening. I oppose the sanctions. However, that being said, once those revolutions, or the Bolivarian revolution, which was originally democratic, occurred in Venezuela, what they have attempted to do is to portray every single setback that they have as a result of an economic war on the part of the United States. Now, I would say, for example, that there was a coup in 2002 that was essentially a U.S.-backed, botched attempt to force Venezuela back into almost an oligarchic regime based, that would be dedicated exclusively to the needs of the empowered two-party system there. There was COPE and a different party over there. So, and then with, excuse me, Nicaragua, what happened was that after President Ortega left power in 1990, his successor, or 1991, excuse me, his successor, Violeta Chamorro, she was the person who restored Nicaragua's economic balance. She separated the powers. She delegated a lot of powers from the presidency, turned it back into a civil society. Then after her, there were a couple, I would say, idiots that took over between her and Ortega. And what he essentially did was he made a deal with the Catholic Church to get back into power,
right?
As a, in order to marry his past as a Sandinista leader. And essentially, now that he's in power, he's developed into the type of autocrat that he always was under, during the Cold War. The only difference is that there is no Contra force at the moment that is assaulting his regime. He's actually acting at the behest of his own organization in order to quell the protests of a lot of people who have been displaced, including people that were displaced by the Chinese interoceanic.
Before you get too far ahead, just so that we have an agreement, and for whoever's watching's sake, when Ortega made this deal with the Catholic Church, he basically had to go pro-life, which before the Sandinistas were pro-choice. And then he also had to have, the Catholic leadership at the table for decision making. And I forget, there was some other elements that he brought into this coalition to take back power, because originally in 1990, the U.S. backed the overthrow in Chamorro, and George H.W. Bush spent more on overthrowing Ortega in 1990 than he did on his own election. So it was
that might be the case, but the fact is that he still lost that election, and he acknowledged it.
Yeah, he lost it. Yeah,
we can at the time in 1991, Nicaragua was not going to be a sustainable economy. All of its allies had pretty much, it was part of the Soviet bloc. They had no choice. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had any trade partners. So you could say that they were hedged in and kind of pressured into doing it, but
I don't think there was any kind of to it. The Contras got funding from all over. They committed 1,300 terrorist attacks on the country. They were pressured. There's no doubt.
But in 1987, the Contras and Ortega had already signed a peace treaty. So this was already 4 years later.
Right.
So, after a peace treaty, you would expect there to be democratic elections, correct?
Well, yeah, but I don't think there's any doubt that, it was pushed by the U.S. and obviously some people weren't totally happy. But yeah, basically, I think we're in basic agreement that Ortega came back into power after Chamorro by forming this coalition with the Catholic Church, and it was a little bit more amenable to business interests than he was back in the Sandinista days.
Yeah, and I would say that his position as far as abortion is so, I would say it's pretty much extreme even in my mind, because I'm a pretty pro-life person. I don't believe that you should arrest. I don't think you should arrest people for having abortions. or prohibit the practice even by doctors, which I think is I mean, if a physician thinks that it's in the interest of the mother or the child to have an abortion, then it's not my place to argue with a physician, not whether I'm the Catholic Church or I'm the government.
Okay, and just before we go into the future, let me ask you, how would you interpret this state? If I make this statement that basically the U.S. uses its embassies and its partnerships with the IMF, what the U.S. wants in Central America, and I mean pretty much around the world, but Central America and Venezuela and South America, is for our bankers, corporations, and investors to have get into these countries. I mean, that's basically what our whole foreign policy goal is about. Would you agree with that?
I would say that the U.S. always wants to open up avenues to have trade with other countries, including putting their corporations in it. I think that's one of the reasons that President Clinton opened up relations with Vietnam.
Right.
So I don't think it's limited to Latin America. I think where we differ on that is to what degree they exert that pressure. Now, I would say that, like I brought up the 2002 coup in Venezuela, at certain points they overstep their bounds, and that's why I'm a huge critic of the CIA. I'm a huge critic of a lot of these
right.
big time interventionists in the State Department, around the world. I'd probably say in 80 to 90% of cases, I think our interventions actually cause more problems than they solve.
Right, and it's also pretty well documented that the CIA, like you said, works with the State Department, works through the embassies, works with business leaders and civil societies in these countries and human aid organizations, all to kind of achieve their purpose in the country.
Well, I think with some of these human aid organizations, I know the National Endowment for Democracy, I would say the State Department is more of a partner with them, but you have to remember that is kind of the mission statement of the CIA. So I don't think we're really revealing any secrets there, that the CIA explicitly, excuse me, I do have a cough, so I apologize to the audience. But I have these Hillary coughs, buddy. So anyway, there's an issue where we have to really define the role of the CIA in the future, if we're even to keep the CIA. And unfortunately, I would say that, especially during the Cold War, they laid the groundwork for a lot of the resentment around Latin America. And yes, they did it along, hand in hand with the State Department. So I don't know. I think we agree on some of that. I don't know about all of it.
We're closer than I thought we would be. So basically, we're up to when Ortega took back over after the Chamorros, which, what year would have that been? 2000?
No, 2007. He was reelected.
Okay. So from 2007 to today, do you have much to say, or do you just want to get up to the current?
Okay. So what essentially happened was, like I said, one of the great things about Violeta Chamorro, who, by the way, also was an opponent of Ortega's predecessor, the Somozas. You've probably heard of the Somozas, right? The family,
right? And that was the interesting thing, was like that Adolfo Calero dude.
Adolfo Calero, yeah.
He was originally kind of with the Somozas, but then he got kicked out, and then he wound up being kind of the head of the Contras, or at least the U.S. point of the Contras.
I can start from the 70s if you want, and you can chime in if you want, and we can work up till 2007.
Well, it seems like we're in basic kind of agreement, except for I think we have a little bit of difference opinion about as far as if the Chamorro was the good, or they did good things or bad things or whatever, versus the Sandinistas. I think the main reason they accomplished anything was just that the U.S. quit attacking them for a while. And but anyway, so Ortega took back over in 2007, and then his government was it was more with the Catholics. It was a little bit more moderate, I guess you could say. And then up until recently, would you say things had been going pretty well in there, or horrible?
Well, that's why I did send you that article a couple weeks ago that I wrote for my personal blog, not on the Hard News. And I kind of unveil really what the process is now. That's why I'm saying that President Chamorro, the most beneficial thing she did for Venezuela for Nicaragua, was to devolve a lot of the powers back from the presidency to the legislature and the judiciary. And what Ortega has been doing since then is to do the exact opposite, very similar to what's been going on in Venezuela. So that there are, like we've both agreed, there are areas where I think the U.S. has interfered that have been to the detriment of Latin American countries, whether it's Bolivia, whether it's Peru, whether it's Nicaragua. But I think when you create a country, sorry, when you create a paradigm where the president keeps seizing back powers, as Ortega has, including interfering with the Supreme Court, including forming a closer than ever relationship with Venezuela, where they were basically dependent on Venezuelan oil until 2015. He created a model that has allowed, Nicaragua to become very dependent on a number of countries. First and foremost would be China. Then would be, of course, Venezuela, which can no longer export any oil to Nicaragua. That's one of the reasons that the price of gasoline and other petroleum derivatives has been going up over there. And essentially, he's laid the groundwork for any accomplishments he had during his first 6 years in power. Since coming back, they've all come to unravel. And what they're saying, what they're doing now, they're going to the old tactic of blaming everything on an economic war and external pressures. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but even, and remember, you did send me that clip from the Real News, and I did watch it, and I did analyze it, and I think I gave a fair analysis to all the people there. One of the people there, the professor, bear with me for a second, Professor Trevor Evans, who is a left-wing professor from Britain working in Germany, he essentially said that the gains of the Ortega presidency since he came back to power have been for the well-off in the business community. So maybe on the surface, and maybe we can agree on this, I don't know if we can, but maybe on the surface it seems to be a progressive socialist regime, but in reality it seems that most of the benefits have gone to the business class or foreign concerns that are in Nicaragua, such as the Chinese government and certain powers that are involved there. So that's basically where we are at right now. And since April, there have been riots that have killed, by some estimates, 285 people.
So what do you think about those riots? What are they rioting for?
I would say that the riots are due to the tightening clamp of the Ortega regime since 2013. Since 2013, President Ortega has been, I mentioned the canal project, so he basically evicted a lot of farmers from their land in order to have the Chinese build a canal from the Pacific to the Caribbean. It turns out that the Chinese apparently don't have the money to come through with their investment. So at the moment, it seems like the canal is canceled. So there were already riots in 2013 building up until the recent issue with the Social Security going bankrupt in Nicaragua. So they had to lower the benefits and raise the taxes. So that's the official reason why the riots broke out. And I would say that's why the the general population started to riot. And then you have the university population, which is a little more committed to it. So you have certain areas of the country that are more committed to it, such as the city of Masaya, Cordoba. There would be, especially I think it's called the Unopoli, the University of Nicaragua.
Well, see, from my perspective, I had a little bit. There was pressure from the IMF and the business community that's aligned with the U.S. that wanted to cut 53,000 people off of their benefits, and the Ortega regime came up with this alternative to that, which kept everybody on but cut down by 5% and asked for a little bit more contributions from the business community, which of course they don't want to give, because they're no different than the business community in the US or whatever. So I'm not exactly sure where you're at. Are you arguing that it's bad to cut the social benefits, that they shouldn't have done that?
No, I'm arguing that they got themselves into a situation where they had to do it, and unfortunately, if I would give, I don't know if I can give advice to Daniel Ortega, but the fact is that during his first term since back in power, he was increasing all these social benefits due to the beneficial relationship he had with Venezuela. Of course, you remember after 2013, the price of oil worldwide went down. So and also the Venezuelan state oil company PDVSA has been unable to keep their output up, so they can't supply the oil to Nicaragua. And also they were also giving them other forms of material aid. So that's kind of dried up. And along with that, Nicaragua.
I'm just trying to figure out do you support the protesters that are rioting?
Well, I mean, I don't know if support is the right word, but I think that I understand why this whole issue has come to pass. I think
the only reason I asked that is because we're kind of going through the same thing in the U.S. right now. Is that the Trump administration gave these massive tax cuts. Now the House has Paul Ryan and the House Republicans have put forward this bill to cut Medicaid and Social Security. I think 1.5 trillion out of Medicaid and 4 billion out of Social Security. So do you think the U.S. people should riot against the government and overthrow the Trump regime?
Do I think that they should riot against the Trump regime? I don't know if I should tell the people in Nicaragua to riot, but essentially the Trump government, the Trump campaign was built on reducing people being on entitlements. And Ortega was his campaign.
Well, no, it wasn't. Trump promised not to cut Social Security and Medicaid.
Right, but the Republican Party said that they would.
Well, that's not why people elected Trump, though. So, I mean, if it's right for Nicaraguans,
they elected 2 houses of Congress as well.
If it's right for the Nicaraguans to riot because of cuts, then wouldn't it be the same for the U.S. or?
Well, they have been rioting here. I mean, you've been paying attention to the news.
I don't think anybody's shot at anybody yet or tried to overthrow the government. I've seen a lot of peaceful protests.
You're not aware of what happened in Portland this weekend?
Yeah, the Nazis came through and the Antifa opposed them.
Yeah, which Nazis? Who are the Nazis in Portland?
Well, there was 3 groups involved, and one of them was Europa something or other, a white nationalist group that, there's always this thing on the right where there's Nazis there, but they say they're not Nazis. They
okay,
say, well,
so you're going to impugn them by saying that they're Nazis, but they refuse to self-identify as Nazis.
No, it was a group was there that self-identified as white nationalists.
Yeah, and they're not allowed to march in the streets.
Well, I'm saying that's what happened.
No, but you're trying to suggest that there are no violent riots happening, and there are.
Well, maybe you don't understand what Antifa is. Antifa is a group that when they perceive there being fascism, they oppose it. When there's not fascism, they go away.
Yeah, keyword being perceived, but they can be wrong in their perception. Is it not true that they can be wrong in their perception?
I would say white nationalists are fascist. I think that's
but you failed to establish that they're white nationalists.
Their stated goal is to take power of the country and turn it into a white ethno state.
Sure, but does that entitle Antifa to violently attack them?
No, they're not entitled. It's breaking the law. But Antifa's perspective is it's worth breaking the law to stop it because they started in Europe against the Nazis. I mean, that's where Antifa came from.
Yeah, and did they succeed there?
If a lot of people think that they should have started sooner. I mean, the Antifa in Russia stopped the Nazis from killing a lot of people.
Well, what are you talking about, Antifa in Russia?
Yeah, there was Antifa in Russia and Poland.
Who?
Antifa, that's where it came from.
No, Antifa started in Germany.
No, it started in Poland and Russia.
How did Antifa
oppose the Nazis?
I think you're talking about the Soviet Union stopped the Germans from conquering them.
No, there was Antifa that started before the government took action. I don't know. We're getting off track here, but
so back to we're still on the topic of Nicaragua, correct?
But neither of these groups, nothing of what happened in Portland was about overthrowing the government or opposing the government. And the other interesting fact that I think is worth noting as far as Nicaragua is concerned is some of these students have met with U.S. senators. There's pictures of them meeting with Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Ileana Ross Layton. Yeah, and so they're pushing the NICA Act, which is also part of this whole thing, going with the IMF and sanctions and everything else. I don't know why they have a big hard on for Nicaragua and
okay. Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Is it illegal to meet with a U.S. senator if you're a Nicaraguan?
No, but I think that shows how those student groups got involved with the civil societies through the embassy, through the CIA. It shows the connection of the U.S. interest in overthrowing the Ortega regime.
Yeah, that might very well be, but we have
Yeah.
Venezuelan and other interests that meet here with groups in the United States that are dedicated to the overthrow of the U.S. government. So it's a two-way street.
You think it's a two-way street? You think Venezuela
Absolutely.
is trying to overthrow the U.S.?
Sure.
I don't think so, dude.
No, Venezuela has been funding the Party of Socialism and Liberation here in the U.S., and their stated goal is to overthrow the U.S. government and impose a.
How have they been funding them?
I could send you some documents. I have basically some research on a story I'm working on. I have to update it, but it's true.
Funding them with what?
Basically, the Venezuelan government, like I said, you've heard of the company PDVSA, correct?
Yeah.
So PDVSA has a U.S. subsidiary called Citgo. You remember Citgo gasoline?
Sure, yeah.
So Citgo gasoline is involved in numerous ways in funding some of these groups, through donations. There are also donations to groups like NACLA, which is a think tank that's dedicated to promoting the Bolivarian revolution. They're over here in New York City, not where I am, but they are in New York City. So they do distribute funding through a number of nonprofits to those groups.
Okay.
Which I think for a long time was legal. At this point, it might actually be illegal because of U.S. sanctions. Which, by the way, I've stated already. Just to be clear, I oppose the sanctions.
Well, usually usually the way I guess you can't really always stop funding, but as far as the U.S. keeps pretty close track, so I think our CIA does a little better job of keeping tabs on that than anybody else. After the Patriot Act, of course, they can monitor bank accounts and transfers, and that's a big part of our whole, police state now. But
but the CIA does not have the jurisdiction to prosecute. The CIA is an intelligence agency; they're not a law enforcement agency. The CIA cannot bring charges against an organization. The FBI.
If there's money going to political operations, it's illegal. I mean, they would prosecute that.
But it wouldn't be the CIA; it would have to be the FBI.
Okay.
So the CIA would have to share that information with the FBI in order for that to happen.
What I'm saying is there's no stopping the U.S. funding going the other way. And not only do we do it through military and through the CIA, we also do it through, they switched it to private, like that National Endowment for Democracy, and also through USAID, which a lot of times they will say is for humanitarian reasons. It winds up being shit. So
I think you have a point there. I don't dispute that at all.
I think the problem they're facing in Nicaragua, I don't know that much. Like, I don't know how I would feel if I was in that country, but I think I would probably look at like El Salvador and Honduras and see how bad it is there for U.S.-backed governments. And I would say, I don't want any fucking part of that. Because, they're in El Salvador, there's a murder every hour. They've got 60 murders per 100,000. Nicaragua is only 6 per 100,000. There isn't a stream of refugees coming from Nicaragua, but there is from El Salvador and Honduras, where they have governments backed by us. We spent.
All right, let's talk about El Salvador. Who's the president of El Salvador? Do you know his name?
I don't right now.
Okay, his name is Salvador Sanchez Cerén. Do you know what party he is with?
I don't.
The Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front. They were originally the allies of the Sandinistas during the Cold War, so they're led by a leftist leader. I don't know to what degree they have an adversarial relationship with the U.S., but you cannot say that they are basically American puppets without somehow substantiating it. So I would say that
business interests are still there, and I think those right-wing death squads are still in operation. From what I've heard, is we're already. The people that were deporting back to El Salvador, a lot of them are winding up dead within a week.
Yeah, because the people that we're deporting from here often are criminals that are hated over there as well. There's vigilante groups in El Salvador as well because the police aren't efficient at
You think that the people that we're deporting are generally criminals?
A lot of them are.
Absolutely. No, they're not.
Do you have any statistics on it?
They're not. They're not getting the criminals.
So you don't think we're deporting people from MS-13?
There's 10,000 MS-13 in the U.S. There's 11 million immigrants. When you saw those pictures of the
11 million immigrants,
when you saw those pictures of the detention facilities, did you see anybody with tattoos there?
You're talking about two different things. those people are not the 11 million people are not all from El Salvador. El Salvador, I don't think even has a population of 11 million people. So you're confusing the numbers there.
No, I'm saying that they're not. The most of the people being deported are not MS-13.
You're talking about the people being detained, correct?
Detained and deported.
Right, but I'm talking about people being deported in general. Not all of the people deported are detained at the border.
Are you saying that the only people getting killed in El Salvador are MS-13?
No, I would say some. I would say that some of them are MS-13 people.
Well, okay, well, let's move to Honduras.
I need to hear more information that's more specific from you about the people being killed.
So in Honduras, you know, it was a coup of ours in 2009, and they're still pissed about that, right?
Yes.
And so the last election, we've had $114 million of, you know, your tax dollars, my tax dollars sent down there, and there was 40 people killed on December after that election, and Trump congratulated them on because it was our dude got put in.
Okay, and I oppose that. So, I mean, what's your point?
Well, I'm just saying that, you know, there's a lot of violence. Nicaragua is one of the least violent countries.
But it's also the poorest country of all of them.
By what measure?
By GDP, by per capita GDP, by all of them.
But they have a good healthcare system, and like I say, they still have the Social Security benefits, even if it's being cut by 5%.
Yeah, but they're a sixth of the size of the Guatemalan economy, and Guatemala is one of the poorest countries in the world as well. So,
don't you think that in general, like, they should just be able to solve these problems for themselves without U.S. interference?
Yeah, I said that at the beginning of the chat today.
Okay, so we agree on that much anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you?
I'm just bringing awareness to it. I've said over and over again, I don't believe in military intervention, and I also would say sanctions are a bad idea as well.
But you do like that people are meeting with our congressmen then, right? And they're getting money from them and stuff?
Well, you'd have to prove that they're getting money from them, first of all, from the congressmen. Are you saying that they're getting money from the congressmen or from the state department?
It's documented. Yeah, it's going through that National Endowment for Democracy and USA. They've spent, there was an article in Global American, which is the publication for National Endowment for Democracy, that showed 4.1 million. They bragged about it. They said this 4.1 million is helping to topple the Ortega government.
Okay, I'll say something about that. And
okay.
I think, okay, so I wouldn't say that I'm thrilled that the U.S. government is sending money for that, because I think it sends a bad message. But if they're receiving money from a private individual, I would have no problem, because that's
it's going from the government through that.
Right. So I'm saying that I think the National Endowment for Democracy, I think the fact that we do this in many cases does send the wrong message.
I actually think when they get to the bottom, and honestly, I can't back this up. You know, you could call it a tinfoil hat conspiracy or whatever, but I think when they get to the bottom of this 21 trillion that's missing apparently from the CIA, I think that is where a lot of it has gone.
Okay, I mean, I don't have any argument about this. So, I mean, can you say that again for a second?
Well, you've heard about how the CIA is missing $21 trillion, right?
Yes.
And I think that a lot of that has gone into these regime operations. I think that although obviously nobody can document that, I think that if you followed like the Iran-Contra hearings and stuff, and you realized how it kind of got it separated from official capacity to where like there was only one commanding officer making decisions, and then eventually even like Ollie North, he started soliciting funds from private individuals and kind of created this completely separate thing from the CIA. That really concerns me, because you wonder how many operations have spun off, and then you also have to think about, you know, drugs and all kinds of illicit activities. It would be almost too tempting to think that that never happens, right? That
I think you're right to be concerned about it. I think that if we audited, you know, I believe in auditing the Fed. I think by auditing other instruments of the government, such as the CIA, I think that, you know, we would probably find out. But I mean, we do find out about other similar issues in the Middle East where we end up funding branches of Al Qaeda. So, you know, you could be right about that. I'm not saying that you're not right. I'm just saying that it's not a justification for a government behaving in the way that Ortega does. You know, it's something that when things like this happen in the U.S., also I think people should at least campaign against it. I'm against things like civil asset forfeiture here. I'm for due process of defendants in a court of law, things like that. So I think that on that, but not to get off the bridge there. I think you're correct that the CIA has historically been involved in a number of operations similar to that with the Contras. In this case, I would say that by doing it and funding groups that are not explicitly armed groups, I think it's still an issue. I would not be happy with the U.S. government doing that. If private individuals donate to these NGOs, I don't see a problem with it.
Well, in my opinion, it was armed groups because it started with this group of students that obviously had some contact and funding through that national endowment to kind of be the tip of the spear. But then right away, there was masked men with mortars attacking the government in Nicaragua. And where do you think
they're improvised mortars? So if they're funded, why can't they buy actual military grade mortars? I mean, if you look at any of the videos, they're not military grade mortars.
Well, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. But I mean, I feel like it's pretty clear that it's the business community that's aligned with the U.S. and this national endowment, and there's concerted effort. I mean, you don't hear the rhetoric with like that Ileana Rawslate, and I listened to her do a couple deals in Congress, and she keeps hammering Nicaragua and Venezuela. There's obviously a concerted interest, and it reminds me of the Reagan administration with like that whole United States Council for World Freedom and all those wackos,
All right, so I'll say something about the Contras as well. So I would say that probably 60% of the Contras were exactly what you're talking about. They were the ones aligned with Adolfo Calero. Another faction of the Contras were aligned with Eden Pastora, who was a former Sandinista himself. So and I remember reading this a long time ago.
I had a different first name for Pastora. Was it Eden? Did sometimes they call it Eden?
But in Spanish it's pronounced Eden. So
okay.
So anyway, one of the flaws of the Sandinista revolution, and they probably would have been a little more successful if they would have delegated
not been attacked a lot by the Contras.
Well, I mean, they didn't delegate the power to the local people. So eventually, a lot of the former Sandinistas went and defected to the Contras as well, and they formed their own Contras groups. So the Contras were two different groups, or even more.
Right.
They were the ones that were.
I actually thought that the Pastora group was the bigger group.
The Pastora group was the more successful one because they were more organic. The ones that were backed by the CIA were basically in it for the drug money.
Right. I thought that too, but I'll tell you what. Did you ever watch on C-SPAN? There's a video, I think it's titled Investigating CIA Cocaine Smuggling or something.
I've seen other, I haven't seen that specific one, but I've seen other ones.
Well, you'd remember this one because Calero and that Eden, what did you say his name was? Eden
Pastora.
Yeah, they were there, and it seemed like Calero kept reaching into his pocket and getting cocaine out and snorting it right in front of.
Sure, but I mean the Sandinistas themselves were also dealing drugs, so I don't think that there's any moral high ground on any side in terms of the drug war.
I don't mean morality. I just thought it was ballsy for him to do it right there in front of him and make it so obvious. And then that Pastor guy was speaking in Spanish when it was clear he understands English just fine, and they were almost thumbing their nose at Congress because he kept saying, I'm just a fisherman. I will be down there fishing with a line and a pole. And it's pretty clear that was a heavy duty dude. That was the only time he ever, I think, came to the U.S. And he came, in my opinion, he came just to do this, to do, you can't do anything to me. I'm untouchable.
So I think like obviously there were like the Contra War was part of the Cold War, and we basically committed a lot of illegal acts in the course of the Contra War, and I've never disputed that, and I think we're on the same page as far as that. Also the arms trading. Let's not forget that,
right.
Which I think we were violating our own embargo with Iran. So, I am not somebody who's going to stand up and defend the CIA or the Contras or something. I would say that this situation is somewhat different. So, Take that for what it's worth.
It's somewhat different. I won't argue with you on that, but I just say I think those same interests are still there. And the same interest is the same interest that we had in Eastern Europe, and the same interest we had in the Middle East, same interest we had in Vietnam, which is basically the bankers, corporations, and investors that are allied with the U.S. want to go in and have control of the economy of countries.
Well, that could be, but that does not discount the fact that there are people on the ground who have become organically attached to these protests. So on the one hand, you do have people, you do have organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy. I think we can both accept that. You cannot attribute all of the chaos that's happened in Nicaragua just to those people. Because the fact of the matter is that even in Ortega's own hometown, where he was originally very popular, there are riots. You cannot deny that there are actual Sandinista figures, such as Carlos Mejia, who I featured in my article, who have defected to the opposition. So, you know, you can say that, yes, it does align with the interests of the business community. Sometimes the interests of the business community align with the broader public. Sometimes they don't. You know, like in Venezuela in 2002, I would say that the business community's coup at the time was basically, you know, that was an illegal act. They did perpetrate something that was, you know, it was infringing on the rights not just of Chavez, but also of the Nicaraguan public, because they were going to change the constitution in the course of their coup. That's something I can never get behind. But in this case, I think we're seeing something different. So, I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's fine. It's hard to know without, I mean, we don't have any basis for comparison because there isn't a country that the U.S. has just left alone and let them, you know, do their own thing.
I mean, we've let Argentina do their own thing.
No, we haven't.
Okay, then what way have we
overthrew the government of Argentina, and we play the same game there with the IMF.
We never overthrew the government of Argentina.
Yeah, I think we did.
What year was it?
I don't have the details on it.
I think you're thinking of Chile. You're thinking of Chile, probably.
No, I'm pretty sure there was Argentina too, but maybe I'm wrong.
Argentina, the military itself overthrew the government several times, but it wasn't because of the CIA. So there are right-wing governments in Latin America that just overthrow the government all the time. But you can't just blame literally. I think you can tell from the time we've spent talking that I'm no friend of the CIA. At the same time, I'm unwilling to blame literally every problem around the globe or in Argentina on the CIA. And you know, the fact of the matter is that in certain countries in Latin America, we've had undue influence. You know, for example, what we did in Cuba, that brought on the Castro government. Now, does that justify literally everything that the Castro government has done since then? I don't think so. I think that you have to find a medium between supporting one side and the other. I think you have to support the interests of the people that matter, which is the broader public of that country.
Well, it's been almost 40 minutes now. Do you want to wrap this up a little bit? I think we're like, what outcome do you want to happen in Nicaragua?
I think, you know, it's difficult to say. I think eventually Ortega will have to resign or call an early election. You know, it's really going to depend whether he can get financial help from China to stick around until then, because like, and also I believe he had some questions about Black Lives Matter for me. But the thing is that Did you want to do Black Lives Matter? No, you get, yeah, just let me wrap up this issue. So what I'm saying is, and this is very important, I don't believe the US should be basically stringing along these governments like puppets. At the same time, I think we have to recognize that other countries are intervening in a similar way that the US has in the past in these countries like Venezuela and Nicaragua, especially China and especially Russia. Doesn't mean that I'm saying that we should go to a conflict with China or a conflict with Russia, but I'm saying that explains what we're seeing here. I believe Venezuela is $45 billion in debt to China, and China is refusing to extend their loan grace period. So that is going to be one of the issues that will basically drag the Venezuelan government through a very bitter period, and it already has. And it's a similar issue with Nicaragua. So that's basically what I'm saying, that I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Well, I think the biggest problem they have in Venezuela now is, I mean, first they had the sanctions, then they had the U.S. seized, I think, like $2 billion worth of oil.
that Citgo claimed was owed or whatever.
No, but they lost that in an international trial. They lost that in a judgment. So what do you want?
I think that
that was ConocoPhillips, by the way.
I think that there was a shred of hope for Venezuela, but now that the Saudis are going to dump more oil and bring the prices back down, I think they're going to have a hard time. I mean, for a while, it was just the oil prices were going up. They were going to come out of it, I think. But that also depends on if they could do a functional government, too, which they've had problems in the past. So
let me pose a question for you. What would you say is the strategy that Venezuela should take in order to dig itself out of the crisis?
What I would have liked to have seen was just the U.S. not do sanctions, get the hell out, leave them the fuck alone, withdraw the CIA, stop supporting the opposition. And then if they fail, I would accept it. Just let them fail. But, I don't think the election in Venezuela was rigged. I think it was legitimate. I think the opposition was claiming, we're going to tell people not to vote to prove that it's rigged. That doesn't make any sense, right? So
a lot of their candidates were disqualified. I mean, you can't have a fair election if most of the opposition candidates are disqualified ahead of time.
And you can't expect the ruling regime to just accept it when a foreign government is meddling in their election either. So I guess in a sense, there was no way there was going to be a perfectly fair election, right?
No, I mean, Venezuela interferes in elections in other countries as well. I mean, they have their fund. They give funding to other. I mean, that's the way it happens. So
nobody interferes like we interfere.
I mean, I think you're correct that we do interfere. I think you're correct that we do interfere in other countries, and I mean, we've both agreed on that. But Venezuela, for them to claim that it was a free and fair election when you have a massive refugee crisis where so many of the opposition voters have fled the country anyway, I think the election's kind of meaningless. So
this is where I look at when I consider the entirety based on what I know about South America and Central America. When I consider the entirety of it, what I see is that the U.S. wants this massively right-wing, pro-business deal in all these countries. We have the most power and influence over them than anybody. Sure, when they are given this choice of fight the U.S. or side, with Russia or Cuba or Venezuela, they kind of have to pick. And like you said, it's kind of who's first and who's second. Like if we withdraw, then does Cuba or Russia or China take charge? And I understand that about leaving a vacuum, but it's kind of hard to know who made the first move there or whatever, right?
No, we did make the first move. I think you're right about the U.S. making the first move, but where you're wrong is that you're saying that the U.S. has the most influence in Venezuela now. The most influence in Venezuela right now are the countries that it's indebted to, and the countries it's indebted to are its strategic partners, which first and foremost would be China and Russia and Cuba. I don't think they're in debt to Cuba, but they definitely depend on their security forces that are there, as well as their massive staff of doctors that are staffing their hospitals, because the Venezuelan doctors themselves could not afford to live there. But other countries like Iran, they have a major stake in Venezuela. I've discussed on my channel with people from Venezuela how Iran has basically made a lot of money through contracts to uphold their dam infrastructure. They have a massive dam. I forgot off the top of my head what it's called, but basically Venezuela has under the government over there, they've depleted their own human talent. Basically, most of the well-educated people in Venezuela that were able to leave already have left, and they're basically completely dependent on these allies, and those allies are taking advantage of it. And by the way, in their place, I would too. If I could make that much money off of Venezuela as a Chinese leader, and they were for a long time, I would do it, but they're not going to get their money back from Venezuela. I just don't see it happening. So it's a major.
Just to finish my point, you do make a good point about China, but China has really no interest in how left-wing or right-wing a government is. They just want to be able to do business. What I was getting around to saying was there's been this power struggle since way back, even probably before World War II, but certainly since World War II. Certainly a marked difference since 1980 when Reagan really amped things up as far as opposing any country that was getting support from Russia and kind of engaging and forcing this polarization, right? But what I have seen is that the U.S. has more power over them than certainly Russia or Iran or whatever. Maybe China today has a little more or similar economic, but the U.S. has always had more power and more control, and we have always wanted there to be right-wing governments, and somehow all these left-wing governments keep popping back up. Somehow we can never just quite convince people to be a U.S. democracy like we would like them to be. So in my mind, what that tells me is there probably should be some kind of a logical compromise. And it seems to me like the U.S. is too ideologic, like they never want to say that. They always want to say, no, you know, no social programs, no, get rid of that. You can't have these left-wing ideas. And it just seems ridiculous at this point to me. Like, you're either going to have to compromise. And honestly, at this point, I don't think we have any integrity to do that stuff anymore, you know? Right. And with the internet and all this being out in the open, everybody knows about it. I think the jig is up on the U.S. trying this dickish foreign policy of trying to control the world, you know?
So yeah, I think in that respect, of course, you know, intervention in either of those countries, Nicaragua or Venezuela, long term would probably be a horrible idea. And
we are intervening, though. We are intervening right now today.
Well, how are we intervening in Nicaragua?
Well, like I said, at $4.1 million, and obviously those students that led that protest were aligned with the U.S.
Yeah, we still have our State Department. We still have CIA. In 2013, there were already protests due to the canal. So this isn't something that just started in 2018.
Are they talking about sanctions? They're trying to make changes to the NICA Act.
Well, they shouldn't. Okay, what do you want from me? You want me to agree with everything that Marco Rubio is saying? I'm not. But
well, no, I don't want you to agree, but I want you. I mean, we're obviously intervening. We've never stopped intervening.
I would say that the way the U.S. approaches it to react to what I think you're trying to ask me is that when these things happen, I don't necessarily think sanctions benefit. And you know, I think I already mentioned this. I think in the case of Venezuela, we wouldn't need to impose sanctions for them to fall apart. They're already mismanaging their economy bad enough. In a few years, and I'm hearing rumors, and I'm not going to confirm them until I see documented proof that the oil company PDVSA will be sold off to some of these partners. Okay, so if that happens, who's to blame for that? It's not the United States. It has to be the sovereign government has to take responsibility for something. We should take responsibility for the wrong things we do, and they should take responsibility for the things that they do wrong, but they're not going to do it, and we both know that. And the U.S. doesn't take responsibility for the wrong things we do. So, you know, I'm not trying to be Mr. Rogers here and tell people how to, you know, be friendly neighbors. I'm just saying that at a certain point, you have to analyze the actual actions of the Venezuelan government and the Nicaraguan government. When you have President Ortega running for office with his wife as the vice presidential candidate, and she's basically backing literally every policy that he has, and the whole canal, and the canal gets canceled, and now all of the economy of Nicaragua is going to explode anyway, because most of the projections were based on the idea that there would be an interoceanic canal between the Pacific and the Caribbean that would engender growth in Nicaragua. Well, that's not really going to happen now. So what's Nicaragua supposed to look to? Well, they can't look at these geriatric rulers that are just going to keep imposing the same policies and taking more powers. I think it's bad when right-wing dictators and left-wing dictators seize too many powers and you know, concentrate them in the executive. So, you know, I think that should be something we agree on. I think we agree on that with Honduras, and we should agree on that in Nicaragua and Venezuela as well.
Well, I don't know that is the case in Nicaragua. I mean, I really don't know. You're saying that, but I mean, I haven't.
No, the fact of the matter is that Ortega's own brother, who was the former chief of staff of the military and was one of the Sandinista military leaders, has said that. He said that his brother has basically become a dictator.
Well, I think that they should have I think they should have an election and decide that for themselves. But when I know that my country is putting pressure on them, it's going to be hard for me to accept any kind of election as a natural occurrence.
Right, but it's not.
And
really,
then
also you have to remember.
What you would be in favor is if they have an election of having it returned to like a Chamorro type government, right?
I mean, I can't vote on their behalf. I mean, obviously, I think that would be the best choice, but I can't tell them how to vote.
Well, your tax dollars are going to accomplish it. You might as well, if that's what you're for, you might as well be happy. That's
no, I
where your
didn't say
tax
that I was
dollars are
for that.
going.
I didn't say that I was for spending our tax dollars. And you asked me that question, and I said that I'm against it.
Okay, fair enough. So I guess on BLM, I just start by asking you, I mean, you're in favor of democracy, right? I mean, just as a general idea, you're not like you're for that, right? You're for democracy?
For like a representative democracy, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so like if you have a community of people, they should have some say over, like if your water is coming to your house and it's dirty and it's crappy, the citizens of a community would have a right to go to their municipal government and expect them to figure out a way to fix the water, right?
Yeah, that's a good example. Yes.
So if there's like a community and they're not happy about the way they're being policed, they should be able to go to their government and petition their government to address this problem with the police, right?
Yes.
So you're in favor of BLM then?
No, because I think as an organization, it goes beyond that. It goes towards its tactics go beyond what you're talking about.
I don't think it does. I mean, I think they have tried and tried to petition the government. When that doesn't work, what is the next step? It's a
well, I'll give you
protest.
the example of something that happened in my county this past week. So there was can I share the screen? Do you mind?
I think if you can, if you know how to do it.
Yeah, 1 second. Let me go to the right tab. So there's a suburb, and I actually have some friends that live there, where this couple claimed that they were harassed by some white supremacists. And, you know, they claim that they've been victimized by hate crimes for years since they moved there since 2011. Right. And of course, and they have this photo of this stuffed animal hanging from a noose and whatever. And that's it from this news article. And Black Lives Matter went and they demonstrated against the mayor of the city. They basically said, you know, community unity walk support for the Berry family on June 30th. And then, you know, they also called for the resignation of the mayor. This is before there was any investigation. You can see this?
I can see some of it, yeah.
Okay, so this is the mayor, Gary Starr. So they actually called on him to resign, even though the couple were not cooperating with the police investigation of white supremacist harassment of their house. So they were complaining to the public and raising money, and yet they wouldn't cooperate with the police. They wouldn't turn over the surveillance camera footage that they had. And instead, eventually it was this, I mean, I don't know if it's been confirmed, but.
Am I reading this right? It says that they were, their complaint was that the mayor had been silent about it?
Yes.
Okay.
But the mayor is not the law enforcement official, correct? That would be the chief of police. I mean, we both understand that.
The mayor's office, the mayor works with the chief of police. Yes, he does have seniority over the chief of police.
Right, but I mean, he's not the person who would determine who's the person behind the attacks. He's not the investigator.
It would be fine for a community to go to their mayor and ask him to address the policing situation.
Right, but you're aware that nobody was found to be culpable in the crime, correct?
What I'm reading is that they were complaining that he had been silent. So I think what they wanted was just to see him taking some action and making a statement to address
before you can conclude that a crime was committed, you need to discover who committed the crime, of course, right?
Well, how would they know that unless he was addressing it? He should have made a statement.
He's not the law enforcement officer. He's the mayor of the city, the chief of police.
That's the public face of the government.
No, the chief of police typically, where I live, I don't know where you live, but where I live, the chief of police addresses issues of criminal activity.
That's not who the people petition, though. They petition the mayor, just like we petition Donald Trump for what ICE is doing. He's the
well, in any case, they discovered that the family was just using the attack. They staged the attacks and they were using it to raise money through a GoFundMe. And Black Lives Matter, and I have the post link. They actually, and I'm not going to show it on the screen because it's on my Facebook, but I can send it to you. Black Lives Matter actually rescinded their support for it, and people, you know, they messaged them and said we knew it was a hoax, and the couple has never presented any evidence.
Who said they knew it was a hoax?
people from the community, from that community, said that they'd known that these people were lying. For example, they were posting photos of dead pets, but one of them turned out to be a black fox. Nobody keeps a black fox as a pet.
Well, that's unfortunate, but I still think that what you're missing here is that the mayor was silent. Like, he should have addressed it and said, yeah, we're going to look into this.
Even if it turned out it was a hoax.
He should have said, we are looking into it, or made a statement of some sort.
No, but it's not his position to intervene in an investigation. You understand that there's a difference between an executive branch and the investigative branch of the government. Do you want your president? Do you like it that Donald Trump intervenes in the Justice Department proceedings? Do you think that that's a proper place of a chief executive in the United States?
What was appropriate was like when problem at the border that the people went to Trump and he made the decision and signed the executive order to put the children back with their parents. I think that's totally logical chain of events.
That's correct, but we're talking about a specific crime where there's been no evidence presented as to who committed it.
They weren't. I don't know what they were petitioning him for, but I think they wanted him to acknowledge it because the people that were making the complaint.
Why does he have to resign if they can't prove that who committed the crime?
Are you acting as if Black Lives Matter had power over him to make him resign? They were asking for his resignation. They weren't forcing him to do it.
So the bottom line in this instance is that they bought into a hoax and they called on the mayor to resign, even though the people were not cooperating with the police. And it wasn't the police that harassed the couple. It was allegedly people that were around the neighborhood. And then they refused to present any evidence. And it appears that it was a hoax.
This is what I think. No, this is what I think. I think it makes perfect sense if that people think that somebody is being harassed for them to petition their mayor and expect him to acknowledge it and handle it, make a statement, do whatever to address their concerns. And I think it also makes perfect sense that when they found out that it was a hoax, that they rescinded their complaint.
So if somebody was to leave, let's say somebody, and I'm not going to say people should do this, but if somebody was to put on your porch a paper bag with dog shit in it and light it on fire, do you think the mayor should comment on that?
No.
Okay, this is exactly the same type of case.
I don't think so.
Well, what's different about it?
Well, wasn't there like a racial element to it?
Well, there was a racial element to it, but the crime itself is not. If
somebody puts a dog shit on my porch, I don't think they're harassing me because I'm black.
They could. You don't know that.
Well, all I'm saying is that I don't understand what your resentment is towards this whole thing. It sounds like
I'll go through another example.
A community group was advocating for this and that.
I think you'll see a pattern here. Okay. So this is from the Utica.
No, there's no pattern.
There's from the University of Albany. Come on. I mean, I listen to you. You'll listen to me, okay? So
I got a piss, dude.
I mean,
we'll after this, take this up some other time. But the examples you sent me on that other thing, hold on. Pulling stuff out of the blue, man.
Well, I mean, I still support. I use supporting sources. I mean, what did you use?
Are you trying to make the case here that Black Lives Matter has never had a legitimate complaint?
I would say the majority of their complaints they're unprovable. So in this case,
what rose to prominence was videos of guys getting killed by cops and the cops not getting prosecuted.
Okay, give me an example of one.
Well, Minnesota.
Yeah, in Minnesota, they found that the person was armed and that he was not cooperating with police instruction.
He was legally armed, and yes, he did cooperate with the police instruction. The police
officer told him to put his hands on the steering wheel, and he didn't. He reached into his pocket.
He was in the passenger seat.
Okay, he still told him to keep his arms where they're visible.
No, he asked him for his identification, and he was getting it.
He said to keep his arms visible.
No, that's not what happened.
Okay, give me
Castillo? No.
Philando Castile. So what's the conclusion from this?
The conclusion is that citizens have a right to petition their government.
Okay, and the government can find that their petition is without merit. Okay, so we agree on that.
Exactly.
Okay. So I have no problem. I have no problem with Black Lives Matter having their activism. I don't think they should be banned, if that's the question. I just think that they are often wrong.
All right, man. I got to cut it off. I got to go take a leak. Talk to you later.
Okay.